My father waited until the whole family was seated before he pushed my 10-year-old daughter off her chair. He didn't yell. He just took the back of her seat, tipped it sideways, and set it flat, like he was reading a grocery list. "That seat is for my real grandkid." Emma went down onto the hardwood. Her paper plate flipped, and green beans slid under the table. 12 grown adults watched it happen. Nobody said a word. My mother stared at her lap. My sister reached for her wine. I stood up slow, and I felt the whole room brace for me to scream. I didn't raise my voice. What I said next made my mother drop her glass. And 10 minutes later, a knock came at that door that meant my father would never sit at the head of that table again, where the quietest person at the table is usually the one holding the deed. If you have ever been treated like you didn't belong in your own family, this story is for you. Stay with me, because the part everyone remembers isn't the push, it's the knock. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. 6 hours earlier, I was the one loading the car. That's how it always went. My name is Dana Hensley. I'm 34 and I run a small bookkeeping firm 2 towns over. 4 employees. My name on the door. Built from a card table and a second-hand laptop. In my family, though, I wasn't the woman who did that. I was the quiet one. The reliable one. The one you called when the water heater died or the property tax notice showed up and nobody wanted to open it. I had the trunk packed by 8 that morning. 2 pies, a spiral ham, the good rolls, a case of the sparkling cider Mom liked, and a bag of gifts I'd wrap myself at midnight. Emma sat in the back seat with her seatbelt snug and a flat package balanced on her knees, wrapped in snowman paper she'd picked out. "Do you think Grandpa Ray will like it?" she asked. I met her eyes in the mirror. She'd spent 3 weeks on that drawing. Our whole family at a Christmas table, everybody smiling, even the people who never smiled at her. "He'd be lucky to get it," I said. She smiled and looked out the window at the snow. I didn't tell her the other thing riding in that car with us. The thing folded in my planner. The reason I'd made a 7 o'clock appointment on Christmas night. I'd been planning it for months. Tonight was supposed to be the night I gave this whole family something none of them saw coming. I thought it would be the best surprise I'd ever pulled off. I was half right. It was a surprise. It just wasn't the one I packed the car for. The house I grew up in sits at the end of Warble Lane, a white 2-story with black shutters and a porch that groans on the second step. I know that porch. I paid to have it rebuilt. We came through the side door into the smell of turkey and pine, and the noise hit us the way it always did. Cousins, a football game nobody was watching, my sister's kids thundering down the hall. My father was in his chair by the window, and when Tyler and Sophie ran up, he scooped them into a bear hug, one on each knee. "There they are," he boomed. "There's my grandkids." Emma stood beside me holding her present against her chest. My father looked at her over Tyler's head, and his face did the thing it always did. It went polite, it went flat. "Careful with your shoes on the rug," he told her, and turned back to the other 2. Emma looked at her sneakers. They were clean. I put my hand on her shoulder and steered her toward the kitchen. As we passed the mantel, I glanced up out of pure habit at the framed photos. My parents' wedding, my sister's graduation, the grandkids' school pictures in a neat row. 2 school pictures, not 3. I'd noticed that gap a year ago and said nothing. I noticed the water stain on the ceiling above the mantel too, and I knew exactly what it had cost to fix the roof under it, down to the dollar, because I was the one who'd written the check. Funny thing about a house, everybody thinks they know who it belongs to. Almost nobody in that room actually did. In the living room, Emma decided she couldn't wait for the gift exchange. She walked up to my father with the snowman package held out in both hands. "I made you something, Grandpa Ray." He was mid-sentence with my uncle about the price of diesel. He took the package, glanced at the shape of it, and set it on the side table without opening it. "Thank you," he said, already turned away. Emma stood there a second longer than a kid should have to. My sister Bethany watched from the couch with a glass of wine. "Ah," she said, in that voice that sounds like kindness and lands like a slap. "Did you draw that yourself? That's so sweet." Emma nodded, small. "It's the whole family," she said. "I did everybody." Bethany's smile didn't move. Everybody, huh? She let it sit. Then she went back to her phone. Emma came back to me and pressed into my side, and I felt her go quiet in that specific way I'd learned to read. The way that meant she was folding something up and putting it somewhere I couldn't reach. I crouched down to her level. "Hey," I said, "you want to help me with the cider?" She nodded. In the kitchen, I gave her a job, because a job is the fastest way to give a kid back her hands. And I stood at that counter, peeling foil off a bottle, and made myself a promise I'd made a dozen times before and kept quiet a dozen times before. Not today. Whatever else happened at this table, not today. I had no idea how many times I'd have to keep that promise before the night was over. Turned out it was one more than I thought I had in me. You have to go back 6 years to understand the thing in my planner. 6 years ago, my parents almost lost this house. My father had co-signed a loan for a friend's failed business, and when it went under, the bank came for the collateral, and the collateral was Warble Lane. I found out by accident, the way I found out about most things. A certified letter my mother left on the counter, half hidden under a coupon circular. Foreclosure. 90 days. My father wouldn't talk about it. He said he had it handled. He didn't. So I handled it. I was 28, 3 years into my firm, and I emptied most of what I'd saved, took a second position on my own condo, and I bought the house at the bank's price before it ever hit the auction steps. My name went on the deed. I set it up quiet, through a lawyer, so my father's pride never had to take the hit. I told him I'd helped him refinance. I let him believe the bank had worked with him, and I made sure it stayed believable. My lawyer's office became the mailing address on the deed and the tax rolls, so no county notice, no assessment, no title paperwork ever landed in that mailbox. I put the property taxes and the homeowner's insurance on autopay out of my own account. And here's the thing about my father. The man had never opened a bill in his life. My mother handled every piece of mail that came to Warble Lane, always had, 40 years running, and my mother was the one person alive I'd told. For 6 years he has lived in a house he thinks he owns, and every property tax bill, every furnace repair, every dollar of that new roof has come out of an account with my name on it. I never told a soul but my mother, and I only told her because she caught me signing papers at this very kitchen table one afternoon, and I couldn't lie to her face. She cried. She said, "Your father can never know." And I agreed. 6 years I kept it. I want you to remember that, because when people ask me later why I finally said what I said, they always assume I snapped. I didn't snap. I'd been patient longer than anyone knew. Bethany found me at the counter while the ham warmed. My sister is 31, and she's had a hard few years. Mark's hours got cut at the plant. 2 kids, a rented duplex with a landlord who doesn't fix things. I've helped her more than she knows, and less than she thinks I should. She leaned against the fridge and watched me work. "So," she said, "have you and Mom talked about the house at all?" I kept slicing. "What about it?" "You know, when the time comes." She swirled her wine. "Mom and Dad aren't getting younger. Somebody's going to have to think about all this." She waved her glass at the kitchen, the cabinets, the whole house. "It just makes sense for it to stay with the kids. The grandkids, I mean. Tyler and Sophie will need a place someday." She said the grandkids like it was a closed list. 2 names on it. I set the knife down and looked at her. "That's a strange thing to be planning at Christmas," I said. "I'm just being practical." She shrugged, all innocence. "You don't have anybody to leave things to anyway. Not really." There it was. Not really. The whole family had a way of putting that phrase near Emma, like a little asterisk. I picked the knife back up. "Emma's my daughter, Bethany." "Of course she is," Bethany said, in the tone of a woman agreeing to something she doesn't believe. She drifted off toward the living room with her wine, and I stood there with a very clear picture forming of what my sister had been quietly campaigning for, at a table she assumed she'd inherit. She was wrong about who owned the house. She had no idea how wrong. Neither did she know I'd already decided to be generous. That was still true. For about 2 more hours, it was still true. My mother caught my elbow on my way back through the hall. Loretta Hensley is 63, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who keeps peace the way other people keep a garden. Constant weeding, no glory. She pulled me into the little alcove by the stairs where the coats hang. "Dana," she whispered. "Whatever's bothering you, please. Not tonight. You know how your father gets at the holidays." "I'm not doing anything, Mom." "I know that look." She glanced past me toward the living room, toward Emma, who was sitting on the floor now stacking Sophie's blocks even though Sophie kept knocking them down. Something crossed my mother's face when she looked at my daughter. It wasn't cold. It was the opposite of cold. And that was almost worse, because whatever love was in it, she'd decided long ago to keep it behind glass. "She's a sweet girl," my mother said quietly. "She is. I wish—" She stopped herself. Her hand tightened on my sleeve. "You've done so much for this family. More than anyone knows. More than they deserve." She caught the word before it finished landing and pressed her lips together. My mother knew. She was the one person in that house who knew whose name was on the deed, and she carried it the way she carried everything, folded up small and hidden where her husband wouldn't find it. "Just get through dinner," she said. "For me." I looked at her a long moment. My mother had spent 40 years choosing peace over Emma, over me, over the truth. And I'd let her, because she was my mother and I loved her, and I understood being afraid of my father. But I remember thinking, standing in that coat alcove, one of these days, Mom, the peace is going to cost more than the fight. I just didn't know it would be that night. At 6, my mother started calling people to the table, and my father took over the seating like a man directing traffic he'd invented. "Tyler, right here by me. Sophie, next to your brother." He patted the 2 chairs closest to the head of the table, the good chairs, the ones with arms. Then he looked down the long stretch of table to the folding chair at the far end, the one wedged near the kitchen door where the draft comes through. "Emma can sit down there." Bethany didn't even look up. "There's a spot down here, sweetie," she called, not moving to make one. My father settled into his chair at the head with Tyler on his right and Sophie on his left, and he said it to no one and everyone, half under his breath, buttering a roll. "Real grandkids sit up front." I heard it. Emma heard it too. I watched her hear it. She walked the length of that table to the folding chair by the draft and sat down without a sound, and she put her napkin in her lap the way I'd taught her, and she folded her hands and waited to be told it was okay to eat. 10 years old. I looked at my father laughing with Tyler about a football play, and then I looked at the clock on the wall above the china cabinet. 6:15. Marcus Delgado, my estate attorney, would be at that front door at 7 sharp with a folder I'd spent 3 months preparing. I had 45 minutes. 45 minutes before everything in that house was supposed to change in the best possible way. I remember thinking I could hold it together for 45 minutes. I remember thinking the hard part of the night was already behind us. I have never been so wrong about anything in my life. My father likes to talk about the Hensleys. He does it every holiday, and he did it that night, tapping his knife on the table for quiet before the food had even gone around. "You kids should know where you come from," he said, looking at Tyler and Sophie. "The Hensleys built things. My grandfather cleared 40 acres by hand. This family is blood and it's land, and that means something. You carry the name, you carry the line." He said blood twice, and land once, and the whole time his eyes never went to the end of the table where my daughter sat. Emma, being 10 and being brave in a way that broke my heart, raised her hand a little, the way she did at school. "Grandpa Ray? Am I a Hensley?" The table went quiet in a way that food tables don't usually go quiet. My father's jaw worked. He picked up his water glass and took a slow drink and set it back down. "Eat your dinner," he said, and turned to ask Tyler about basketball. Bethany made a small sound into her wine that might have been a laugh. Emma lowered her hand. She looked down at her plate, and I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still, the way a pond goes still right before it freezes solid overnight. I reached under the table and found her hand and squeezed it once. She squeezed back. But she'd asked the question out loud now, in front of everyone, and nobody had answered it. And a question like that doesn't just evaporate. It goes somewhere. It waits. 6 years I'd kept my mouth shut to protect my father's pride. Watching him not answer my daughter, I felt the first hairline crack run through all that patience. I excused myself for the bathroom and instead stepped out onto the back porch with my coat over my shoulders. The cold was clean and sharp, and I breathed it in and dialed Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "Dana, we still on for 7? "We're still on," I said. "You have everything?" "The transfer package, the trust documents, 2 copies notarized and ready. All it needs is your signature." He paused. "You sure you want to do this on Christmas? It's a big gift. There's no undoing it once it's signed." I looked through the window at the warm yellow light, at my family around that table, at the back of my father's head at the top of it. This was the plan I'd been proud of for months. I was going to put the house I'd quietly owned for 6 years, into a family trust. Not just for me, for my parents to live in, protected, for the rest of their lives, for Bethany's kids, for Emma, all of them, named, equal, cared for. I was going to hand my father back the security he never knew he'd lost, and I was never even going to make him say thank you. I was going to let him keep believing he'd earned it. That was the surprise in my planner. That was the 7 o'clock knock. "I'm sure," I told Marcus. "Come to the front. Christmas dinner will be winding down. It'll be a good moment." "See you at 7, he said. I hung up and stood in the cold a minute longer, watching my daughter's small shape at the far end of the table, alone by the drafty door. I told myself she'd understand someday why I'd waited to fix all this the quiet way. I really believe the quiet way was still on the table. When I came back in, my aunt was trying to organize a photo. "Before everybody eats, let's get a Christmas picture." She waved her phone around. "Grandkids up front by Grandpa Ray. Come on, come on." Tyler and Sophie scrambled to my father's knees. Emma started to slide off her folding chair to join them, because she was 10, and someone had said grandkids, and she was a kid who still hoped that word might include her. My father put a hand up. "Just the 2, he said to my aunt, easy as anything, gesturing at Tyler and Sophie. "Let's keep it to the ones that carry the name, for the mantle." My aunt's smile froze. She looked at me. She looked at Emma, who had stopped halfway off her chair, 1 foot on the floor, caught. For 1 long second nobody moved. Then my aunt laughed too loud and said, "Oh, let's just get everybody, it's Christmas." And I stood up and walked to the end of the table and held out my hand to my daughter. "Come help me check the pies, Bug," I said, loud and warm, like the photo had never happened. Emma took my hand and I walked her into the kitchen and I crouched down and I fixed a barrette that didn't need fixing just so I had a reason to hold her face for a second. "I want to be in the picture," she said. Not crying, just stating it, the way you state a fact you've decided not to argue with. "I know," I said. "I know you do." I did not trust my voice to say more than that. Behind me, in the dining room, I could hear my father arranging the real grandkids for the mantle, and I could feel the last of my patience wearing thin as spring ice. We stayed in the kitchen a few minutes, Emma and me, just breathing. She checked the pies she couldn't reach, and I lifted her so she could see them through the oven glass. "That one's the pecan," I told her. "You picked it." "It looks good," she said, serious as a health inspector. Then she got quiet again, and I set her down, and she looked up at me with those steady brown eyes. "Mom, is it because I'm adopted?" There are moments in a life that split it into a before and an after, and you feel the split happen in real time, like a bone under too much weight. This was one. I got down on 1 knee on that kitchen floor so we were eye to eye, and I did not lie to her, because I never have and I never will. "Some people," I said, "think family is only about blood. Grandpa Ray thinks that, and he's wrong about it, and it isn't your fault, and it is never, ever going to be your job to fix it." She thought about that. "But he's my grandpa." "He is what he decides to be," I said. "But listen to me." I took both her hands. "I chose you. Do you understand what that means? Blood is an accident. Choosing is a promise. I stood in a courtroom and I raised my hand and I promised a judge and I promised God and I promised you. You are my daughter. Nobody at that table gets a vote. Nobody. Not ever. She nodded slowly, and something in her small shoulders came down half an inch. Okay, she said. Okay. I kissed the top of her head and stood up, and my knees cracked, and we went back out to that table because that's what you do. I meant every word I'd said to her. I was about to find out if I meant it enough to do something about it. Dinner got served. My mother went around with the turkey platter, and my father held court, and somewhere in the middle of it he started handing out the little things he always handed out. Silver dollars for the grandkids, a tradition from his own father. He pressed one into Tyler's palm. There's my boy. One into Sophie's. There's my girl. He came around the table with the felt bag, and when he got near Emma's end, he simply closed the bag and set it down. Running low, he said, to nobody, and sat back down. He had 2 more in there. I saw them. Emma saw the bag close. She kept eating her mashed potatoes like nothing had happened, which was somehow the thing that undid me most. How good she'd already gotten at pretending not to notice. I put my hand flat on the table to steady myself, and through the fabric of my coat draped over the back of my chair, I felt the hard rectangle of my planner in the inside pocket. And inside that planner, folded in thirds, was the thing I carried everywhere. I didn't take it out. I just pressed my palm against the shape of it and let it remind me who I actually was in that house, no matter how they'd all decided to treat me and mine. My father thought he was the one holding this family together with his talk of blood and land. He had no idea he was sitting in a chair, in a house, eating off a table, that a woman he wouldn't even give a silver dollar to had kept from going under. I glanced at the clock. 6:40. 20 minutes. And for the first time all night, I let myself wonder if the quiet plan was really the right plan after all. I told them I needed to grab something from the car, and instead I went up the stairs to my old bedroom, the one my mother still keeps like a museum. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and I took out my planner, and I opened it to the back, to the clear plastic sleeve, and I slid the folded paper out. On top was a photograph. It's the only picture I keep with me at all times. It was taken 8 years ago on the steps of the county courthouse, me at 26. Holding a 2-year-old with wild curls and a courthouse-issued teddy bear, both of us mid-laugh, a caseworker beaming beside us. The day Emma's adoption was finalized. The day a judge looked at me and said the words that made her legally, permanently, no take-backs mine. I have read the transcript of that hearing so many times I know it by heart. And folded behind that photograph, in thirds, worn soft at the creases, was the deed to the house on Warble Lane, with my name typed on it plain as day, and clipped to it, Marcus's cover letter confirming the 7 o'clock appointment to sign it all into the family trust, a photo of the day I chose her, a deed to the house they thought made them better than her. I held both those pieces of paper in my 2 hands on that childhood bed, and I looked at the picture of my daughter at 2 years old, laughing on courthouse steps, and I thought about her at 10, closing her hands around a silver dollar that never came. And I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My father didn't need this house given back to him gently. My daughter needed to know, out loud, in front of everyone, exactly who she was. Those were not the same gift. And I could only afford to give one of them tonight. I came back downstairs with the deed and the photo tucked into my jacket pocket instead of my planner, closer to me now, like a hand of cards I hadn't decided how to play. In the dining room, my father had pulled Tyler up out of his chair and was walking him around to the head of the table, to his own chair, the big one with the arms. "You sit here a minute," he was telling the boy. "Get used to it. This is where the head of the family sits. Someday that'll be you, if you do right and carry the name." Tyler grinned and climbed up into the throne, swinging his legs. My father stood behind him with both hands on the chair back, proud as a man showing off a prize bull. And down at the far end, by the drafty door, my daughter watched a boy get taught how to inherit a house that already belonged to her mother. Emma wasn't upset. She was studying it, the way she studies everything, filing it away. Then she did the smallest, bravest thing. She got up from the folding chair and she walked to the empty seat beside my mother. A real chair, mid-table. Nothing special, just a normal chair that happened to be empty. She just wanted to sit in a real chair for the meal like a real person. She pulled it out and sat down and scooted in and reached for her water. My mother went stiff beside her. My father's head came up. I was still 3 steps from the table, the deed in my pocket. My mouth already opening to say something easy and diffusing, some joke to smooth it over the way I'd smoothed 100 moments before. I was too slow. He was already moving. My phone buzzed in my pocket at that exact moment. I felt it against my hip. And later, I'd see it was Marcus. Running early, be there in 15 minutes. But I didn't look at it then because my father had crossed the room to where Emma sat in that ordinary chair beside my mother, and the whole table had gone the kind of quiet where you can hear the furnace kick on. Here is the thing I want you to understand, because people always ask me this part. I had a lawyer 15 minutes out with the papers that would have handed my father everything he could ever want, protected, forever. All I had to do was keep the peace 15 more minutes and let the quiet plan work. Some part of me was still reaching for that, still hoping, right up to the last second, that my father would surprise me, that he'd tousle Emma's hair and say, "Sit anywhere, sweetheart. It's Christmas," and let me go through with the gift. I want to be honest that I gave him that chance. I gave him chance after chance after chance, for years, and I gave him one more in that dining room with a lawyer on the porch steps. That's not weakness. I need you to hear that. Choosing to hope one last time isn't weakness. It's just the last thing you do before you stop hoping for good. He reached the chair. He put his hand on the back of it. And I saw his face. And I knew, the way you know whether, that he was not going to surprise me. He was going to do exactly what he always did. He was just going to do it with his hands this time. I should tell you who was in that room, because it matters for what came after. This wasn't a private family spat behind closed doors. The Petersons from next door had come by for dessert, the way they did every year, and they were standing in the doorway to the living room with plates in hand. My Uncle Dale and Aunt Carol were at the table. Bethany's husband Mark, 2 of my cousins, my mother, my sister. 12, 13 people. Most of them people whose opinion my father had spent his whole life managing. My father is a man who lives and dies by what the neighbors think. He wanted an audience that night. He'd said as much earlier, bragging that with everyone here it was a good time to talk about the future of this family, meaning the house, meaning the will, meaning who got what. He wanted witnesses for his legacy. He was about to get witnesses, all right, just not for the legacy he had in mind. I stood there with the deed in my pocket and the neighbors in the doorway, and my daughter in an ordinary chair, and I watched my father decide that this, with everyone watching, was the moment to make a point about blood. Some men can't help themselves in front of a crowd. The crowd is the whole reason. He wanted them all to see him defend the sacred Hensley line. He got his wish. Every single person in that room saw what he did next, and every single person in that room heard what I said back, and there is not one of them who tells the story today the way my father wishes they would. He built that audience himself. Then he stepped into it. For a second I thought he was just going to make her move. That would have been bad enough, an old man ordering a 10-year-old out of a chair in front of company. I braced for that. My mother must have braced for it too, because she put her hand lightly on Emma's arm. A little there, a little please don't make trouble. The reflex of a woman who has spent her life absorbing shocks so nobody upstream has to feel them. "Ray," my mother said softly. "Let her sit, it's fine, there's room." "It's not about room," my father said. And his voice had that flat, reasonable, grocery list tone that is so much worse than shouting, because shouting is heat, and this was cold. "There's a way things are done in this family." He looked down at my daughter in the chair beside his wife. Emma looked up at him. She wasn't scared. She had her chin up, my girl, in a way that told me every one of those courtroom words had landed after all. And my father, in front of the Petersons and my uncle and my sister and God and everybody, decided that a little girl's chin was a challenge to the House of Hensley. I was moving now. I'd started around the table. But there's a distance in every one of these stories between where you're standing and where you need to be. And I have run that distance 1,000 times in my dreams since, and I have never once gotten there in time. He reached down. He took the back of her chair in his hand, and the whole room drew one breath and held it. He tipped the chair, not gently. He took the back of it and pulled it sideways and out, the way you'd yank a weed, and my daughter went off the seat and down onto the hardwood floor, and the chair clattered, and her water glass tipped and rolled and dumped across the tablecloth in a dark spreading stain. And into the silence, loud enough for the neighbors in the doorway, loud enough for the mantel and the china cabinet and the whole watching room, my father said it. That seat is for my real grandkid. Real grandkid. Those words. I have heard them in my sleep every night since. He stood there over her with his hand still on the chair he'd emptied, and he wasn't even angry. That was the thing. He was satisfied. He had corrected a wrong in the universe. He had put the line back where it belonged. And my Emma, 10 years old in her Christmas dress, on the floor of a house her mother owned, did not cry. She gathered herself up onto her knees and she started, quietly, to pick up the green beans that had spilled off her plate, putting them back one at a time, cleaning up the mess an adult had made of her, because she thought that was her job. That's what did it. Not the push. The push made my hands shake. But watching my child kneel on the floor and tidy up her own humiliation so she wouldn't be any trouble, that's the image that ended 6 years of my silence in the space of one breath. I stopped walking. I stood very still at the side of that table. 12 people stared. My sister had her wine halfway to her mouth. My mother had both hands pressed to her chest, and my father, satisfied, started to turn back toward his own chair at the head of the table, like the matter was settled. I said his name. Just his name. Dad. He turned around. I crossed to my daughter first. Him I could deal with in a minute. He wasn't going anywhere. I crouched down on that hardwood floor next to Emma and I stopped her hands, gently, from picking up any more green beans. Leave it, baby, I said, quiet, just for her. That's not yours to clean up. I checked her elbow where she'd landed, turned her wrist over, looked in her eyes. Are you hurt? She shook her head. I'm okay. I know you are, I said. You're the toughest person in this room. And then, in front of all of them, I picked up the chair he had emptied, that same ordinary chair, and I set it back square on its 4 legs at the table, and I lifted my daughter up off the floor, and I sat her right back down in it, in the exact seat he'd pulled her out of. I tucked her in, and I put her napkin back in her lap, and I smoothed her hair. The room did not breathe. My father's face was going a slow, dangerous red. Dana, he started. She is not going to sit in. She's sitting there, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I have found that you almost never have to, if you mean it all the way down. She's sitting right there, and you and I are going to talk about this house now, since you brought up the future of the family. I straightened up from Emma's chair and I turned to face my father across that stained tablecloth, and I felt something settle over me that I can only describe as calm. The flat, level calm of a woman who has finally, after 6 years, decided to stop protecting a man from the truth. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just pushed the wrong little girl. My father does not do well when the quiet one stops being quiet. It scrambled something in him. He'd expected me to cry, maybe, or to grab Emma and storm out the way I'd stormed out of holidays before, giving him the satisfaction of being the reasonable one left at the table shaking his head about his sensitive daughter. Instead, I was just standing there, level, waiting. So he got loud because loud was the only tool he had left. This is my house, he said, and he said it to the room, to the Petersons, to his audience. In my house, I decide how my family sits at my table. I have earned that. I built this. Everything you see. He swept his arm around the dining room, the china cabinet, the water-stained ceiling, the whole of Warble Lane. Everything in this house I worked for, and I will not have some... He caught himself, glanced at the neighbors, changed course. I will not be told how to run my own family under my own roof. Bethany, God help her, chose that moment to back him up. Dana, come on, she said. He's not wrong. It's his house. You're making a scene over a chair. A scene over a chair. My sister, who'd been quietly measuring that dining room for her own kids' inheritance for years, calling this a scene over a chair. I looked at the two of them, my father purple at the head of the table and my sister smug over her wine, both of them so certain of the ground they were standing on, and I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Because they had no idea the ground wasn't theirs. It never had been. And in about 90 seconds, a knock at the door was going to prove it. Here's where my father, being my father, decided to go all the way. He could have let it drop. Emma was back in her seat. The room was tense. A smarter man reads the weather and changes the subject to football. Not Ray Hensley. He'd been handed an audience and a grievance, and he was going to plant his flag. Since we're all here, he announced, drawing himself up, and since your daughter wants to talk about this family's future, let's talk about it. Everybody's going to find out eventually. He looked around the table, making sure he had them. This house, this land, it goes to the grandchildren who carry the Hensley name. Tyler, Sophie. That's how it should be. That's how my father did it, and his father before him. He nodded down at Emma without quite looking at her. Some people at this table aren't blood, and that's nobody's fault. But blood is blood. The girl's got no claim here. I won't pretend otherwise just to be polite. The Petersons were staring at their dessert plates. My Aunt Carol looked like she wanted the floor to open. My mother had gone white as the tablecloth. And me. I felt the last thing let go inside my chest. Clean. Almost peaceful. Like a rope finally cut. He'd said it. Out loud. In front of witnesses. The girl's got no claim here. My 10-year-old had no claim on a house. I let his words hang in the air a second so everyone could really hear them. Then I pulled out the empty chair at my end of the table, and I sat down. Slow, and I folded my hands, and I looked at my father the way you look at a man who has just signed something without reading it. Dad, I said, since we're talking about the house. Before I tell you what I said back, let me say this to you directly, because if you've read this far, you already know the sound that dining room made. If you have ever sat quiet at a table while somebody else decided who counts as family and who doesn't, if you've ever swallowed it for the sake of peace, year after year, holiday after holiday, then you know exactly why my hands were steady and my voice was low. This is that moment. Subscribe so the algorithm keeps stories like this one on your feed, and stay with me because the knock is 30 seconds away. Now, back to my father's table. Since we're talking about the house, I said again, and the room quieted to hear me because I hadn't raised my voice once, and somehow that made everyone lean in. You keep saying it's your house, your roof, everything you worked for. I kept my hands folded on the tablecloth. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer, because a lot of people are listening. 6 years ago, this house went into foreclosure. Do you remember that, Dad? The certified letter. The 90 days. Do you remember how close you came to losing Warble Lane? My father's jaw tightened. That got handled, he said. I refinanced. That's private family business, and it's got nothing to do with... Who handled it, Dad? I said. Quiet. Level. You said you refinanced. Walk everyone through it. Which bank? What did they say when you called them? His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because he'd never called a bank. He'd never handled anything. He'd woken up one morning 6 years ago and the problem was simply gone, and he'd never once let himself ask why. Now, in front of everyone, he had to. You didn't refinance anything, I said. I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't need to be. The facts were heavy enough on their own. There was no refinance. The bank was done with you. In 90 days, they were going to auction this house on the courthouse steps. The same steps. My voice caught for 1 second, and I let it. And then I went on. And I was 28 years old, and I took a second mortgage on my own condo, and I emptied my savings, and I bought this house from the bank before it ever went to auction. The room was so quiet I could hear the Christmas tree lights buzzing. I've paid the property taxes for 6 years. I paid for the roof over that stain right there. I paid for the furnace you're feeling warm from right now. Every repair, every bill, out of my account, in my name. I set it up quietly, through a lawyer so you'd never have to feel it. I let you believe you'd saved yourself because I thought that was a kindness. I thought protecting your pride was worth more than the truth. I looked at my mother. Mom knew. She's the only one. She's kept it for 6 years because she was afraid of what you'd do if you found out a woman saved this house. My mother made a small, broken sound and pressed her napkin to her mouth. My father was shaking his head, slow, back and forth, a man refusing a delivery. That's not, he said. You're lying. Loretta, tell her to stop lying. And my mother, for the first time in 40 years of keeping his peace, did not tell me to stop. She just looked at the table and cried. That silence was its own answer, and every person in that room understood it. But here's the part you really need to hear, I said, because it's the part that's going to keep you up at night. I unfolded my hands. I didn't come here tonight to embarrass you, Dad. I want you to understand that. I came here to give it all back. I reached into my jacket and I laid the folded deed on the tablecloth, right in the spreading water stain from Emma's spilled glass, and I smoothed it flat so the top line showed, my name typed plain across it. I've had a lawyer working for 3 months. Tonight, on Christmas, he was coming to this house at 7 o'clock with papers I was going to sign. I was going to put Warble Lane into a family trust. You and Mom would live here, protected for the rest of your lives. Nobody could ever touch it ever again. And it would be left, in equal shares, to every grandchild in this family. I looked down the table at Tyler, at Sophie, and then at Emma. All of them. Named. Equal. Tyler. Sophie. And Emma. I was going to give you back the security you lost and let you keep believing you'd earned it, and I was never going to say a word about any of this. Not tonight. Not ever. My father stared at the deed on the table. Bethany had gone very still, doing math behind her eyes. That was the surprise, I said. That was the 7 o'clock knock. It was almost 7 now. The push, the shouting, the whole ugly scene had taken barely 10 minutes, and it had run right up to the appointment I'd set months before. And on the word knock, I swear to you on my life, on that exact word, as if the whole night had been waiting for its cue, 3 sharp raps landed on the front door. Everyone jumped. The Petersons turned. My father's head snapped toward the sound, and through the frosted glass of the front door, you could see the shape of a man in a dark overcoat, holding a leather folder, standing on the porch I'd paid to rebuild. Marcus. Right on time. Nobody moved to answer it. My father looked from the door to the deed on the table to me, and for the first time in my whole life I watched Ray Hensley genuinely not know what to do. So he did the only thing he knew. He reached for control. Well, he said, and tried to make his voice big again, tried to climb back on top of the room. Well, Dana, that's very generous. And of course we appreciate. But a trust like that, that's a family matter. And the house naturally passes to the blood grandchildren. So we'll just have the man draw it up the proper. No. I stood up from my chair. Slow. I put my fingertips on the deed, and I looked my father dead in the eye across that Christmas table, in front of the Petersons and my uncle and my sister and my crying mother and every soul in that house, and I said it quietly, the 4 words that ended it. This house is mine. My mother's wineglass slipped out of her hand and shattered on the hardwood. Nobody even looked. This house is mine, I said again, letting it land. Not the blood grandchildren's, not yours. Mine. It has been mine for 6 years, and the little girl you just pushed onto the floor is the only reason it wasn't going to stay that way. And then Ray Hensley exploded. 6 years of not knowing, 6 seconds of knowing. It broke him open right there at the head of his own table. You can't do this to your own father, he roared, up on his feet now, the reasonable grocery list voice gone, spit flying, face gone from red to something worse. After everything this is my home. I raised you in this house. You can't just— Loretta, say something. You can't throw your parents into the street. What kind of daughter? He was shouting. I wasn't. That's the whole picture right there. Remember it. He was the one screaming about family. I was the one standing perfectly still. I let him run out of breath. Then I went and opened the door, and I brought Marcus in out of the cold, and I introduced him to the room. This is my attorney. And I watched the last of the color drain from my sister's face. Nobody's getting thrown into the street, I said. I'd never do to my parents what was just done to my daughter. That's the difference between us, Dad. You keep talking about real family. So let me tell you what I've learned about real. I walked to the head of the table where he stood, and I didn't take his chair. I just stood beside it. Blood didn't pay this house's taxes. Blood didn't fix the roof. Blood didn't drive 2 towns over every time the furnace died. When you were 90 days from the street, your blood grandchildren couldn't help you. They were in diapers. It was me, the daughter whose kid you won't give a silver dollar to. And when you shoved a 10-year-old onto the floor tonight, not one of your real relatives stood up. She did the standing up. She got up off that floor with more grace than this whole table put together. I looked around at all of them. Real family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up. It's who stays. Emma has more claim on the word Hensley than anyone here because I gave it to her on purpose, in a courtroom, with my hand raised. And that's a stronger thing than an accident of birth will ever be. Marcus, quiet and professional, set his folder on the table. I can confirm Ms. Hensley is the sole legal owner of this property, he said. The transfer we prepared was voluntary. It's entirely at her discretion whether to proceed. He looked at me. Do you want to proceed tonight, Dana? The whole room waited. My father waited. And I looked at my daughter, safe in her chair. No, I said. We're not signing tonight. I didn't burn it all down. That's not who I am. And it's not what Emma needed to see. What she needed to see was her mother stand up straight and set a fair line and hold it. So that's what I did. I told my father, in front of everyone, exactly how it was going to be. He and my mother could stay in the house. It was their home, and I would never take a roof from them. But it would be a real arrangement now, in writing, a proper lease at a fair rate, on the honest understanding that the woman who owned the house would be treated with respect in it, and so would her daughter. Emma is welcome at this table any time, I said, in any chair. If that's ever a problem again, then it stops being a place we come. I didn't yell it. I just said it. The way you say a thing you've fully decided. The trust, the gift, the equal shares, the security handed back with no strings. That was gone. He'd had that in his hands for one evening and thrown it on the floor along with my daughter. Some gifts you only get offered once. My mother came around the table then, stepping over the broken glass in her good shoes, and she knelt down in front of Emma's chair, my proud, terrified, peacekeeping mother, down on the floor at last. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she said, and she was crying too hard to say more, and she took Emma's hands. It didn't fix 40 years, but it was the first true thing I'd seen my mother do in that house, and I let it happen. Emma, being braver and kinder than all of us, patted my mother's hand and said, It's okay, Grandma. It wasn't okay, but that's my girl. She'd rather give grace than be right. My father stood at the head of his table alone, and for the first time, nobody was looking at him. They were all looking at the little girl on the good side of the table. We left not long after, Emma and I, with the pecan pie she'd picked out boxed up under my arm, out the front door and down the porch steps I'd paid to rebuild, into the clean, cold snow. She held my hand the whole way to the car and she was quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. Lighter, like something she'd been carrying got set down. Here's the only wisdom I've got, and I learned it at a Christmas table with a broken glass on the floor. Blood decides who you're related to. It never once decides who you belong to. My father learned that it takes a lifetime to build a table and 4 words to lose your seat at it. The pushed chair, the dropped glass, the knock at 7. If you've ever been the quiet one holding everything together while people decided you didn't count, Tell me in the comments where you finally drew your line. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe for the next one. I'll see you there.